Hello everyone, welcome back to Why Change channel. Let us talk about business analysis interviews. What to expect, how to prepare, what kind of questions you may be asked, and how to present yourself in the best possible way. But first, let's quickly recap a typical recruitment process. What do you expect from that process? It starts with application. You apply for a job. The hiring company or recruitment agency is going to do some initial screening. Then certain group of candidates will be invited for an interview or multiple interviews. After the interviews, there might be some hiring assessments conducted. Then eventually the successful candidates will undergo background and reference checks. And if everything else was successful, then eventually there will be a decision made to make an offer, and then the offer itself and negotiations. Of course, since we are business analysts, we realize that every process has variations. So you should expect variations in the recruitment process as well. Sometimes there may be multiple rounds of interviews and hiring assessments. That depends on how rigorous the recruitment process is and how many requirements or perhaps how many candidates does the hiring company find. There could be no hiring assessments. Not every company chooses to do that. Sometimes they just limit their selection to interviews. Sometimes you will then go directly from an interview to background and reference checks. And of course, there might be multiple rounds of negotiations around the offer where both sides go back and forth until they reach satisfactory conclusion. What's important for us to realize is that there is a decision at every point. Application, screening, interview, assessment. At each of these points, there would be certain decisions made. So today we are going to talk about how to influence this decision, how to perform during your interview so that this decision is successful for you and allows you to move to the next stage in this process and hopefully eventually to the job offer. So what exactly happens in that box that we called an interview? Of course, if we zoom in, it's also going to be a process, right? Say you are a candidate, you're getting invited for your first interview. The interview happens. At that point, the interviewer is going to make one of several decisions. One decision could be to reject you. They don't like you, you're not suitable, you don't have required skills or knowledge. Another decision could be make an offer, and sometimes you get an offer after the very first interview. Again, it depends on the circumstances, desirability, how much in a hurry the recruitment manager is, and so on. The third decision is to shortlist you. That happens either if the hiring company planned in advance to have more than one level of interviews, or if after the first level of interviews, they are undecided and they would like to review a smaller number of candidates one more time, or perhaps have an interview with a different person. At that point, if you have been shortlisted, then you're going to move on to the next interview, which could be of a different nature. Or you could move on to a hiring test. And again, some employers choose to do an interview first and then follow it up with a hiring test. That process can continue a few times. So this decision point here, again, may lead you to a final resolution or may lead you back into being shortlisted and going through another step of the interview. How many loops are possible in this process? Hopefully no more than 2 and 3. And again, if you do get invited to too many interviews or you have to do more than one hiring test, then you have to think whether this is for you and whether you're being taken advantage of. So say you've gone through 1 or 2 or 3 steps in this process, then eventually there will be a final decision either to reject you as a candidate or make you an offer. So what do you expect from a job interview? The interview always starts with introductions, with overview of the position, and that's usually provided by a hiring manager. And from your perspective, you introduce yourself and you make sure you listen carefully to how the position is described to you, because it's not always going to be identical to the definition that you saw in the job description. So make sure you listen. And sometimes the interviewer is going to provide you with that additional information that is really useful for you and you have to listen for, because you don't want to ask the same questions later, right? You have to demonstrate your listening skills. So that's the first part. The next part is interviewer is asking questions and you answer it. Of course, this is that basic, most important part of the interview that we all try to prepare for. That, of course, is not all. There is also observation of the candidate that is happening in parallel with asking questions, how you behave, how you respond, what's your demeanor, and so on. And this is where you have to work really hard on presenting the best version of yourself and remaining professional at all times. There is another part to an interview towards the end, and that's where you as an interviewee are asking questions of the interviewer and get the information. And of course, there's special skills to how to answer questions, what types of questions to ask, again, to demonstrate yourself as an interested candidate. And finally, your interviewer will conclude the interview. In the best case scenario, they will provide some feedback on the spot. It doesn't always happen. Usually they would explain the next steps in the process or when you should expect to hear back from them and whether there will be planned next steps or whether you have to wait first. And at that point, you need to make sure you understand next steps and of course thank them for their time and try to reinforce your interest in the job if you're interested. And as you go through all these steps, which could take between 25 minutes in a shorter interview and up to 1 hour, you have to understand that this is a two-way street all the time. You ask questions, you respond, you listen, you project yourself, you react to what your interviewer is doing, and that mutual evaluation is happening all the time. And not only your interviewer is evaluating you, but you also have to analyze the information you are hearing and try to determine, do you still have interest? Do you still think this is a job for you? Because you are also making a decision, not just your interviewer. So this is the most important part. The interview is always a dialogue. It's always an exchange of information. And by the way, remember it from the other side. It is not your monologue. Try not to monopolize conversations by giving very lengthy answers and make sure you allow your interviewer to lead. Let's talk about the interview questions. What kind of questions are you supposed to get? And again, because we are business analysts, we're going to categorize these questions into several groups because in reality, the variety of questions and the variety of ways that the same questions will be asked can be quite big. And you have to be prepared for the main types of questions. And then that preparation, you just adapt your prepared answer or the ideas about how you would answer this type of question. You will adapt it to how the question was asked. So the first group of questions, of course, icebreakers, a little bit of chit chat. It could be just in the form of exchange of a few sentences, but there could be a couple of questions hidden there. How was your trip? If this is an in-person interview, how are you doing today? And even some seemingly innocent question as how did you like in your lobby? Were there a lot of people at the elevator or anything about the weather? So these are just icebreakers. These are ways to establish a little bit of ease into the interview and make sure you are just as relaxed and as just human as your interviewer. Don't worry and just try to be yourself. So get ready for icebreakers and it's totally fine even if you initiate an icebreaker yourself. Then the next group of questions are about you, the basic who are you questions. This is the proverbial tell me about yourself question. What made you look for a new job? Why do you want to be a business analyst? And maybe what do I need to know about you? And this format sometimes sounds a little bit scary, but really all of these questions can be answered very similarly. And the main goal here is for you to give your elevator speech, give your 1 minute or 35 seconds answer to tell me about yourself question. So your elevator pitch that you always have to have ready has to be centered around what is important to this job and to this interviewer. I do have a whole separate video about this. Have a look, and in that video I'll demonstrate a few examples. But most importantly, you provide a little bit of information about yourself which is relevant to the job. So you may speak about your education, the breadth of your prior experience, your interest in business analysis, maybe your strengths or your most successful projects. Try to condense it to no more than 1 minute, and again, try to make it relevant to business analysis. If you're pivoting your career from another job into business analysis, then again, here focus on how you've prepared yourself. Maybe you've taken training, or you've been doing some job shadowing, or maybe you've been a business analysis apprentice, or you've studied, taken courses. So always think about what is relevant to the job and try to keep it brief. At the end, you can always ask, would you like to hear more? Let me know if you have any questions about it. And by the way, if you are not sure how to answer the other questions, why do you want to be the business analyst, and why do you think you are a good fit, check out my other videos that I will publish here in the comments to this one. So always remember to focus on your motivation, but on positive motivation, never on negative. If you are changing the job because you are not happy in your current job, you don't have to emphasize the unhappy part. Instead, talk about what would motivate you to take a new job, how you're thinking about your career growth, learning new knowledge, maybe learning about new industry. Try not to be negative. Being negative at the beginning of the interview is the worst, because that's your first impression. So your first impression should always be positive, upbeat, very energetic, and it basically has to motivate your interviewer to put their heart into interviewing you. Next, you are going to get some kind of why you questions. Why should I choose you? Why are you special? What is so special about you? We sometimes are a little bit apprehensive about this group of questions. So what it may sound like: what are your main strengths and weaknesses? Tell me about your biggest accomplishment. What do you think sets you apart from other candidates? And what you need to prepare here, and you always have to prepare it in advance. Think about your unique combination of strengths. What are you really strong at, and what is your specialty? So definitely consider your main strengths, your main weaknesses, and also your competencies, your business analysis competencies. And that will help you to answer the next group of questions, which are about what kind of person are you? And this is a typical question that we also call behavioral question or situational, where someone will ask you, what would you do if this and this happened? Tell me about a time where you encountered resistance, or you had to resolve a conflict, or you had conflicting requirements, or someone wanted to change requirements until the last moment, and insert any type of unpleasant or difficult or challenging situation on a project. A question could be, what is the most stressful or challenging situations you've ever had to deal with, or the most difficult person you ever had to deal with? And how would you handle such and such situation? These are usually difficult questions to answer. And again, I do have a whole video just focused on behavioral questions. I will provide you with a link. But as a general guideline, think about preparing several stories from your actual experience, both positive and negative, and then practice telling those stories. And usually you can use the same story to answer different types of questions, because both of them somehow draw on either something positive that happened where you were successful and then you explain why and how did you do it, or something negative where you had to deal with adversity, or deal with a risk that you didn't expect, or deal with some unpleasant either technical situation or perhaps relational situation where the relationships of people were impacted, and you will have to explain how did you get out of the situations, what was the resolution, and what you learned. So in these types of questions, what is being evaluated are your competencies as a business analyst, as a professional. Competencies like communication skills. And again, whenever you tell those stories, think about which of those competencies you will highlight. So is it about communication and using communication to find a way out of that situation? Is it about leadership? Is it about facilitation, listening skills, and trying to understand what people want and what is going on, and maybe things that they're not telling you? It could be about investigating problems and using different techniques to really get to the bottom of the problem to understand the root cause. Could be about teaching others, explaining things to them, explaining difficult concepts to your stakeholders. Could be about conflict resolution. How do you deal with conflict? How you find smart ways of dealing with it and resolving it so that it doesn't jeopardize the progress of the project. And finally, about diplomacy and tact, and so knowing how to deal with sensitive situations. So think about a few stories from your experience, and perhaps if you are a recent graduate, it could be even a story from your university or college times, perhaps working on a team project, because we know even team projects sometimes have the same challenges as we encounter at work. And then work on practice answering those questions, telling the stories. Check out my video. The next group of questions, that's about your business analysis knowledge. Now, these types of questions are more frequently asked of junior business analysts, or someone who is at the beginning of their career. As you get more and more senior, usually those behavioral types of questions prevail. But if you always have to be prepared, and definitely if you have recently started to work in business analysis, or if you are new, you definitely will be asked some questions, because your interviewer wants to evaluate, are you able to do the job? Do you know what to do, basically? So the knowledge-based questions could be starting from business analysis terminology, such as what are different tools and techniques? What is a user story? What is a BRD, business requirements document? What is BPMN, business process model annotation? Do you know how to do it, etc.? So you have to know the terms, you have to know standard abbreviations, and definitely there's lots of books, resources, business analysis, body of knowledge, etc., where you can find all that. You can be asked, what do you know about? And usually it's about a certain business analysis technique. What do you know about process analysis? And then you have to tell briefly how you would do it. What do you know about agile methodologies? You need to know what those are and how to explain in a couple of minutes your understanding of, say, agile methodology. What do you know about business rules? How they're used for business analysis? So again, you have to be here prepared. This is where your knowledge comes in handy. Could be a question, what are non-functional requirements? And again, any other questions, these are just a few examples. Then you can get questions related to business analysis skills. For example, how would you document requirements? This is where you will talk about activities. How would you capture requirements? And perhaps you would also want to mention that there are also techniques for analysis. So you'll do some analysis, elicitation, research first, and then you will document requirements either in a business requirements document or in a backlog using user story format, and so on. What tools would you use for? And insert. What tools would you use for root cause analysis? What tools would you use for creating a screen wireframe? What tools would you use for process analysis? What tools would you use to analyze data to determine exceptional scenarios, etc., etc. I have lots of videos on business analysis tool techniques, lots of articles, and check out some of the links in the description, and those resources would help you prepare for this. And of course, needless to say, you practice it even if you're not currently a business analyst. A lot of these BA techniques you can practice even in other jobs. So definitely try to learn, and try to learn from experience, and then it's much easier for you to talk about it during the interview. Another example, what diagrams are you familiar with? You always have to have some favorite diagrams in your mind. You have to know how to create at least a few types of diagrams. Again, check out my videos, and I do have a video specifically about this interview question. How would you validate requirements? Again, another very important question, because quality of requirements and completeness of requirements has huge impact on project success. So a business analyst doesn't just gather information, doesn't just collect everybody's opinions and write them down. You have to do analysis, you have to compare. So this analytical component has to come in. So it's not just gathering, it's analysis. And then you validate. Does it make sense? Is it complete? Do I see any contradictions? Does it sound like there's a gap here? Is everyone in agreement? Do we have a shared understanding? So all of that is part of validating requirements. All right. What else do you have to be ready for? You may need to talk about your competencies. For example, have you ever facilitated a requirements workshop? Again, sharing your experience of facilitation. What are you good at? How would you usually do it? Sometimes you will be asked specifically, how would you facilitate a virtual workshop? Because, of course, with the proliferation of various web conferencing tools and with many companies still working in a hybrid mode, this is frequently still happening. And sometimes we still have teams that are distributed across different geographical locations. So, by the way, I do have another video about facilitating virtual workshops. Check it out. A question about stakeholders. How would you deal with difficult stakeholders? Almost inevitable, because that's a big part of BA responsibilities. Dealing with stakeholders, interviewing them, listening to them, explaining things to them, learning from them, and making sure they're involved and engaged in the whole process. How do you ensure efficient communication? So various competencies, and again, you can check business analysis body of knowledge for the list of business analysis competencies, and always compare your experience and what you know with how these competencies are described, so that you are aware and you are ready to answer questions based on your experience, because using your own experience and giving examples is always very effective in an interview. Instead of just saying, oh, I'm a really good communicator, it's much better to give a couple of examples. What do you use for communication in different situations, in different types of teams, on different types of projects, and show your versatility, show your proficiency with communication tools. By the way, to answer all of those questions, if you also have a portfolio, some examples of your work like diagrams or your collaboration boards, or for example, matrices and tables, it doesn't have to be very detailed. You probably need to strip off confidential information, but having an example of what you are able to create can be really useful. Sometimes we best answer these competency-based questions with another story. Maybe you had a story prepared for your behavioral interview question and you never got a chance to use it. Maybe the question about competencies is really suitable, and you can take that story and plug it here and really say, let me share with you how I had to deal with an especially difficult stakeholder once, and then you are prepared and you have a good story to tell. Let me give you one example. If you take this question, have you ever facilitated a requirements workshop? Definitely talk about your experience that you have, or you do it all the time, or maybe this is a project where you have to do a lot of requirements workshops. But also you may want to touch on what are best practices and mention briefly how you refer and use those best practices. For example, for facilitating a workshop, what could be best practices? Perhaps to prepare for the workshop, you meet one-on-one with different stakeholders to understand their concerns and understand their position. Sometimes you need a little bit of due diligence and background research before bringing a large group together. During the workshop, we always start with asking open-ended questions, especially when we are in that discovery mode, keeping things open, trying to gather as much information, trying to do that research, trying to hear different opinions, different concerns is important. Later, of course, you will narrow things down, you will start to get confirmations, but at the beginning, try to be open-ended. Listening for pain points. We are solving problems. We have to hear where stakeholders are unhappy with current process, or with perhaps not being able to do certain business functions. We also always have to listen and capture. Of course, we have to remember that these are not necessarily requirements. These are just pain points. For requirements, we have to dig deeper and understand the root cause, but capturing pain points is very important. Parking down things when you see that the discussion is heating up. If someone, by the way, may ask you, what do you do if your discussion seems to get a little bit heated, if there is an argument? Sometimes we just have to park an issue. We may not always resolve it in a meeting. Sometimes that large meeting is not the right place to resolve it. So using a parking lot is always a good technique for facilitation. And modeling, creating diagrams, modeling business scenarios, modeling the process, because it helps facilitation, it keeps things visual. So these are just some examples of what you could mention. Okay, there's also a group of questions that you may get related to methodology and process. They will gauge how well you understand business analysis process. How do we do business analysis? How do we plan it? How do we execute various activities? Is there a sequencing? And the methodology in general, methodology for managing projects, methodology for developing products, and where is business analysis role when this methodology is used in an organization. So it could be about business analyst role on the project. And here is where you have to talk about the roles throughout life cycle of the project and product. Not only during the requirements analysis, but business analyst plays a role during design and development and quality assurance and implementation and user adoption phases. And again, if you need a little bit more help with that, I have resources for you that talk about that. How can a business analyst contribute to an agile team? And this is one of those controversial questions because some agile teams don't use titles and they would not necessarily have an official business analysis title, but there will be someone on a team who is still doing business analysis. So definitely be prepared for this type of questions because many companies use or try to use agile methodologies in one shape or form or another. How do you ensure stakeholder agreement on business requirements? So going back to previous format where we said, how do you validate requirements? Here is a good example where a very similar question can be asked in a different way. We really are still talking about validation of requirements and validation and creation of shared understanding of requirements by all stakeholders. Whether we talk about stakeholder agreements or validation or requirement reviews, we really are talking about the same type of activities. So learn to hear the essence of the question and then it will be much easier for you to answer that. Another example, what are business analyst responsibilities after requirements are signed off? Again, please never say that they're done, that they don't need to do anything. Requirements sign off even for companies that still practice waterfall and have this formal milestone and gate of requirements sign off. And we sometimes still have to do that when we are involving third-party vendors in development of the solutions. After that, business analysts stay just as involved because with design, with development, with system configuration, with testing, there's always clarifications, there is always some changes, some tweaks, there may be some gaps discovered where you need to go back, there may be changes in the external environment that require changes to requirements, there may be regulatory impacts, and there might be different situations where someone misunderstood requirements, even though you thought that was captured very clearly. You have to be there to continue that dialogue and to support shared understanding of requirements, not only between your business stakeholders, but also with your development, testing, and implementation stakeholders. So, by the way, at this point, when you are asked about methodology questions, if it wasn't mentioned before, it's always a good idea to ask if you have an opportunity, what is the methodology used by the company that you're interviewing with. And this could be one of the ways for you to ask your own questions. If you feel that there is an opportunity, because this is usually as we're getting later in the project, you can also ask, could you please share what is the methodology used in your organization? Okay. We've covered a lot of different examples of questions. We talked a little bit about how to answer those questions. Of course, we can talk much more about specific questions and the answers, but this is where I already have lots of videos that you can go and refer to later. But for today and for this video, what I want to emphasize is how to behave during an interview, how to behave so that you project confidence and you make that person want to hire you. And because we're talking about interviews for business analysis, job, family, what I want to emphasize here, among other things, yes, you need to arrive on time. Yes, you need to be friendly. Yes, you need to look professional. On top of all that, during an interview, make sure you behave like a business analysis professional. Constantly in your answers and in your questions, you demonstrate your BA competencies. And this is really crucial for anyone interviewing for business analysis position. So what do I mean by that? Listen to the questions. Answer the right question, okay? Make sure you listen to the end and you digest that. You can always ask for a moment to think about it, because it's not a very good idea to start answering the wrong question, especially for a business analyst, because it's part of your professional competency to listen, to hear, to interpret, to be attentive, because you will be doing it as part of doing your job. You will be asking a lot of questions, listening for answers. So make sure you answer the right question, all right? Ask clarifying questions. Your interviewer is not always going to be very clear. So there are people, right? They're human beings as well. They may be a little bit confusing. They may use a different term or the term that you haven't heard before. It's okay to ask clarifying questions, politely, of course. It's much better to do that than to clarify than again to start answering the wrong question. Another one is make sure you show your analysis and research skills, right? So when you are in an interview, you have to demonstrate that you are well prepared, that you research the company, you research the job, you understand the terminology mentioned in the job, you know something about the industry, ideally not just about that company, but about their main competitors. And by the way, I've known of some companies who always ask in an interview, do you know who is our main competitor? So always be prepared, because you again, you demonstrate your analysis competencies by showing that you're good at research. And please never ask, when it's your turn to ask questions, never ask those basic questions like what does your company do, or where do you have your head offices. Don't ask those basic questions that you could have looked up online on a company website, because it doesn't look good. Okay. Another advice is be concise and clear and articulate. You are an analyst. You are supposed to be good at communication. You're supposed to be able to communicate and express yourself clearly. So do that in an interview. Be very clear. Don't talk for too long. Make sure you assess and you see the reaction of your stakeholder. You adjust yourself. Don't go into very convoluted stories. Maybe get some feedback. Remember that, again, you're demonstrating your communication skills as a business analyst, and it is crucial. And it is so much more important for you to demonstrate it in your answers than just talk endlessly about your strengths of being a good communicator. One more thing. As you're sitting in that interview and as you're answering questions, use that opportunity to elicit information for yourself as a job candidate. Because remember, you are going to a job interview not only to get the job, even that's your primary goal, but you also want to understand whether this is the right job for you. You may really need a job, but still think about whether that opportunity is suitable for you. Because there's nothing worse than jumping into something without thinking and then determining that either the company is not suitable or the job is not right for you and being very unhappy. We know that you could be unhappy in your job, and this is probably why you're leaving your current job. But use the time in an interview to listen for signs and to collect information that may either decide you that yes, it really sounds good and you want to continue, or if you gather that now you have doubts and you're not sure that this is right, that's also useful information for you. So always listen and think about your own interests as a job candidate in finding the job which is truly a good match for what you want. Couple of final things. Sometimes you may be in an interview and your interviewer stumbles. Again, they're just human being. Maybe they are not sure what question to ask, or maybe they misunderstood your answer. This is a time where you show your facilitation skills and your interaction skills by helping them out, suggesting clarification, asking them whether you've answered the right question, giving them a chance to think, or perhaps offering them a story if it looks like they're not sure what to do next. So try to be very sensitive to that. And again, show yourself as a skillful and tactful facilitator, and that really projects well during the interview. Finally, and this is my conclusion, truly is everything we talked about and everything that you do to practice for interviews, the main goal is to increase your confidence, to allow you to be confident in your abilities, confident in your experience, confident in your ability to do this job, because that confidence is often what wins you a job and what wins you perhaps a step into the next round of interviews. If you want to learn more and become more confident as you go for job interviews, a couple of things you need to do. First of all, just keep going to interviews, because it's a fantastic practice. Sometimes even if you aren't looking for a job, it could be useful to go for a couple of interviews just to stay in shape, and then you never know what may turn up. Always practice with friends or partners if you can. Even if you don't have a real interview, they can provide you with good feedback. You can practice in front of the camera if that's easier for you. Just record yourself and then watch it. I also have a video course created especially for someone who wants to practice by themselves. It's called Job Interview Clinic. It has some business analysis extras, and I will provide a link and a discount for you in a description to this video. So lots of ways for you to practice. Practice is good for you. Practice makes you more confident, and confidence is the most important tool and competency that you bring with an interview. Confidence is your ace card. Confidence is something that will always help you to be more successful. All right. So practice, check the resources, and I'll see you in the next video.